When America's most beloved entertainer stepped into a familiar television studio that day, the atmosphere carried a strange tension beneath the bright lights and polite smiles. This was a space she had visited many times before, a place where laughter usually flowed easily and conversations stayed comfortably safe. Yet as Dolly Parton took her seat, shimmering in sequins that reflected decades of confidence and self-acceptance, there was an unmistakable sense that this appearance would not follow the usual script. Across from her sat Joy Behar, whose reputation for sharp commentary and relentless probing was well known. The set of The View hummed with its routine pre-show buzz, but something heavier lingered in the air. Dolly had spent a lifetime navigating interviews, criticism and praise with equal grace. Her career stretched across generations built on music, business acumen, and a carefully crafted public image that blended humor with sincerity. Still, as Joy leaned forward with a tight smile, it became clear that the conversation was heading somewhere uncomfortable. The opening remarks were framed as casual observations about Dolly's long career and signature style, but the tone quickly sharpened. The comments shifted from curiosity to critique, suggesting that her appearance was outdated, exaggerated, and rooted in another era. Dolly responded with warmth, her voice steady and calm. She spoke about consistency, about staying true to what felt authentic, and about the bond she shared with fans who embraced her exactly as she was. Her smile never faded, though a subtle focus settled into her eyes. Joy, however, pressed on, reframing the discussion as a moral issue. The emphasis moved toward whether Dolly's image sent the wrong message to young women, whether glamour and cosmetic enhancement undermined deeper values, and whether her carefully maintained look conflicted with modern ideas of empowerment. The tension rippled across the table. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her chair, clearly sensing the growing discomfort, while Sarah Haynes attempted to redirect the conversation toward safer ground. Each effort was brushed aside as Joy continued, her words growing more pointed. She questioned Dolly's seriousness as an artist and reduced her persona to a caricature, implying that success had come at the cost of depth and integrity. For a brief moment, Dolly remained silent. Those who knew her well understood that this pause was not uncertainty but restraint. She chose her words with care, her fingers resting still as she gathered her thoughts. When she spoke, her tone remained gentle, yet there was a firmness beneath it that commanded attention. She listed her accomplishments plainly, without boasting. She spoke of writing her own music, managing her own ventures, and creating opportunities for thousands of people. The message was clear that substance did not vanish simply because it wore rhinestones. The audience reacted with soft murmurs of approval, but Joy continued, insisting that Dolly's success relied on appealing to outdated fantasies rather than challenging them. At that point, the exchange had shifted from debate to confrontation. Whoopi attempted to intervene again, urging the show to move forward, but Dolly herself signaled that she was willing to continue. Her voice, still sweet, carried a new edge, inviting Joy to fully express her criticism. Joy did exactly that, accusing Dolly of intentionally minimizing her intelligence and presenting a playful, exaggerated persona that she claimed undermined the struggles of women who fought for equality. The studio fell into a heavy silence. Cameras rolled, lights burned bright, and every movement seemed suspended in that moment. Dolly sat upright, composed, her expression serene yet resolute. When she finally spoke again, her words landed with quiet force. She acknowledged Joy's right to hold her opinion, then calmly shifted the focus away from appearances and toward actions. She spoke of literacy initiatives that placed books into the hands of children, of educational opportunities funded for those who lacked resources, and of healthcare support extended to communities in need. As she continued, her voice grew stronger, not louder, emphasizing the difference between tearing others down and lifting them up. Dolly explained that her work had always been about empowerment, particularly for women and children. She described mentorship, job creation, and the belief that kindness paired with determination could change lives. None of these efforts depended on hairstyles, makeup, or costumes. The audience listened in rapt attention, fully aware that they were witnessing a rare moment of dignity standing firm against derision. She concluded by redefining the ideals being questioned. True support among women, she implied, meant respecting different paths and choices. Real strength came from evaluating character through actions rather than outward presentation. Authentic courage, in her view, meant remaining faithful to oneself even in the face of judgment. As her words settled over the studio, the power of her stance was undeniable. Without raising her voice or abandoning her grace, Dolly Parton had drawn a clear boundary, reminding everyone present that respect and impact spoke far louder than criticism ever could. Joy Behar's face had gone noticeably crimson, the calm confidence she usually projected beginning to fracture under the pressure. Her posture stiffened as she tried to maintain control, but the tension was written all over her expression. Dolly Parton watched her carefully, then spoke in a low, steady voice that carried clearly across the studio. From where she was sitting, it didn't look like confidence at all. looked like anger directed at a woman she barely knew, over personal choices that had no impact on her life whatsoever. To Dolly, that kind of resentment didn't come across as righteous criticism. It felt like bitterness wearing a disguise. The other women at the table followed the exchange as if they were watching a fast, moving tennis match, their gazes snapping back and forth between the two. The audience leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something rare was unfolding live on air. Recognizing that the moment was slipping out of her control, Joy Behar attempted to steady herself and steer the conversation back into safer territory. She insisted she wasn't making things personal, only commenting on the kind of message Dolly's public image might send. That attempt didn't land. Dolly interrupted her, and this time there was no softness left in her tone. She pointed out, calmly but firmly, that the remarks had been personal from the very beginning. She listed them plainly being reduced to a cartoon, compared to a plastic doll, accused of harming women simply because she liked sequins and styled her hair a certain way. Then Dolly turned the focus outward, noting the millions of young women watching at home and the example being set by tearing another woman down on national television. Joy opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, visibly caught off guard by how decisively the moment had shifted. The studio fell into complete silence, the kind that hums with anticipation. Even the air felt charged. Joy stumbled through a half-formed explanation about wanting a discussion, but Dolly didn't let the point slide. She clarified the difference between a discussion and an attack, explaining that one required mutual respect while the other thrived on hostility. Her words landed sharply, exposing the contrast without raising her voice. Whoopi Goldberg made another attempt to step in, suggesting a break to cool things down. Joy refused, her pride clearly wounded. She doubled down, accusing Dolly of building an entire career on outdated stereotypes, pretending to be less intelligent than she really was through giggles and charm. According to Joy, that wasn't empowerment, it was manipulation. The audience reacted audibly, shocked by the venom now openly present in her voice. Dolly responded not with anger but with a composed smile and a slow nod. She agreed with one point only: she was, in fact, intelligent. Intelligent enough to build a thriving empire from nothing. Intelligent enough to write songs that resonated deeply with millions. Intelligent enough to understand that her appearance did not erase her achievements or diminish her value. What she couldn't understand, she said evenly, was why anyone believed it was their right to police how other women chose to live and present themselves. Joy's frustration intensified, her face flushing deeper as she accused Dolly of hiding behind a fake persona. She claimed the sweetness was an act, a carefully constructed illusion. Dolly responded instantly, her eyes flashing though her voice remained controlled. Even if it were an act, she argued, what would be wrong with choosing warmth over cruelty, kindness over constant cynicism? She questioned the idea that making people feel good could ever be something shameful. Joy fired back, calling it dishonest and inauthentic. That accusation finally drew a genuine laugh from Dolly, bright and unforced, cutting through the tension like sunlight after a storm. She explained what authenticity truly meant to her. It meant being honest about growing up poor in the mountains of Tennessee. It meant acknowledging the relentless work it took to rise above those circumstances. It meant admitting that her choices, including how she looked, were intentional and opened doors rather than closing them. Authenticity to her was never pretending to be anything other than who she was, a country girl who loved music and people. She contrasted that with what she saw as the real lack of authenticity, which was sitting comfortably behind a desk and throwing judgment at other women simply because their choices challenged someone else's comfort. The panel looked increasingly uneasy. Sarah Haynes appeared desperate for the moment to end, while Sunny Hostin watched closely, clearly already thinking about the aftermath and how it would be addressed later. Joy, however, continued to press her point, insisting that Dolly's image encouraged women to believe success required a specific look. Dolly countered immediately, stating that this narrative was being pushed in the opposite direction. She accused Joy of telling women that embracing femininity, wearing makeup, enjoying beauty and style somehow made them less worthy of respect. According to Dolly, that message suggested women had to abandon traditionally feminine traits to be taken seriously, and that was just another form of limitation dressed up as progress. The studio remained locked in silence as her words settled. The confrontation had moved far beyond personal criticism and into a broader reckoning about judgment, respect, and choice. Without shouting or losing composure, Dolly Parton had reframed the entire exchange, exposing the cost of tearing others down while defending the right of women to define themselves on their own terms. Dolly's voice remained calm but resolute as she made it clear that limiting women to one approved version of empowerment was not liberation at all. To her, it was simply another kind of cage dressed up in modern language. A low murmur of agreement rolled through the audience, growing louder as people nodded along. Joy Behar could feel the shift immediately, the support she might once have relied on slipping away. She protested that her words were being misunderstood, but the certainty she usually carried was gone, replaced by hesitation. Dolly leaned slightly forward, her expression unwavering. From her perspective, the argument being made suggested that any woman who embraced traditional femininity was somehow undermining progress. That idea, Dolly implied, placed one woman in the position of judging how all others should live and present themselves. The weight of that accusation hung heavily in the studio. Joy attempted to respond, but Dolly continued, redirecting the focus to the situation unfolding in front of everyone. She pointed out that she had been invited onto The View to discuss music and charitable efforts, to share work that had taken decades to build. Instead, from the moment she sat down, the conversation had been dominated by criticism of her appearance, her personal choices, and even her character. The implication was unmistakable. This was not a thoughtful exchange or a professional interview, but something far more personal. The challenge lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Joy shifted in her seat, her discomfort obvious now. She admitted weakly that she had only meant to ask difficult questions. Dolly responded by redefining what difficulty truly looked like. Real challenges, she explained, came from addressing meaningful issues like education in rural communities or the realities of managing a business in an unforgiving industry. Serious conversations focused on substance and impact. Mocking a woman's appearance or reducing her to a caricature, she said, was not journalism at all, it was bullying. The silence that followed was profound. The audience barely breathed. Even the crew seemed frozen, unwilling to miss a second of what was happening. Joy made another attempt to recover, suggesting that her intentions had been misunderstood. Dolly stopped her gently but firmly, explaining that the intentions were perfectly clear. The goal had been humiliation, an attempt to diminish someone publicly in order to feel superior. Using a powerful platform to tear down another woman for making different life choices had backfired, and everyone in the room could see it. Joy's face flushed a deeper red, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing that the situation had completely unraveled. Dolly, however, remained composed. She was only just beginning to speak her mind. The confidence that had defined Joy at the start of the segment had faded, replaced by a tense, cornered demeanor. Still, Dolly showed no sign of retreat. She spoke softly, yet every word carried weight. The real loss, she explained, was not personal embarrassment but a missed opportunity. There had been a chance to have a meaningful conversation with someone who had spent half a century navigating the music business. Topics like songwriting, entrepreneurship, and philanthropy could have offered genuine value to viewers. Instead, time had been wasted on shallow criticism driven by dislike of hair and clothing choices. That decision reflected poorly not only on professional standards but on solidarity among women. Joy tried to speak but no sound came out. She glanced toward her co-hosts, searching for rescue, yet none met her eyes. Even Whoopi Goldberg, who often stepped in to diffuse tense moments, stayed silent, allowing events to unfold. Eventually, Joy managed to suggest moving on and agreeing to disagree. Dolly tilted her head slightly, considering the moment with quiet thoughtfulness. Moving on, Dolly agreed, was inevitable. But before that, she believed viewers deserved clarity. She explained that the exchange had never truly been about her. It was about unresolved frustrations directed at women who made different choices. Joy rejected that idea sharply, though her voice shook. Dolly calmly observed a pattern she had noticed over time, one that became visible when reflecting on past interviews. There seemed to be consistent criticism aimed at women who embraced glamour or presented themselves in traditionally feminine ways. The impact of those words was immediate. The studio remained utterly still as the realization settled in. Dolly did not raise her voice or resort to insults. Instead, she laid out her perspective with precision, exposing how judgment could disguise itself as progress. By the time she finished speaking, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The confrontation was no longer about fashion or image. It had become a stark illustration of how power, media, and personal bias could collide, and how dignity and self-assurance could stand firm even under relentless scrutiny. Joy Behar's face drained of color so quickly it was startling, the earlier flush replaced by a pale, unsettled look. For a brief second, she appeared genuinely shaken. She began to speak, insisting she didn't have a problem, but Dolly Parton lifted her hand once more, stopping her gently yet decisively. Dolly said there was, in fact, a problem, and that was what made the moment so unfortunate. She explained that the world was large enough to hold every kind of woman. There was space for those who loved glamour and for those who rejected it entirely. There was room for sequins and for tailored suits, for teased hair and for simple styles. What troubled her was the implication that only one set of choices deserved respect. The studio had gone completely still. No one moved, no one spoke, yet the energy was unmistakable. Everyone present understood they were watching something rare, a lesson in how to confront hostility without losing dignity. Joy made one final attempt to defend herself, accusing Dolly of twisting her words. Dolly smiled again, that familiar warm expression now sharpened by resolve. She said there was no need to twist anything, because the words had already been spoken. She calmly repeated them back, reminding Joy of the insults, the accusations, and the assumptions that had been made on air. Those statements belonged to Joy alone, and Dolly encouraged her to take responsibility for them. The silence that followed felt endless. Joy glanced around the table, but the other hosts avoided her eyes, suddenly fascinated by their notes or the space in front of them. She was isolated. Finally, she stood abruptly, pulling off her microphone as she announced she had reached her limit. Whoopi Goldberg told her firmly to sit back down, but Joy was already stepping away from the table. She snapped that she would not remain seated while being lectured by someone she reduced to a caricature. Her composure had fully collapsed. Dolly stayed seated, watching the outburst with a calm that bordered on compassion. She remarked softly that this was the truth finally revealing itself, not the polished television persona or the proclaimed advocate, but someone unable to tolerate another woman succeeding in her own way. That comment pushed Joy past restraint. Her face twisted with anger as she hurled one last insult, dismissing Dolly as irrelevant and trivializing her life's work. The audience gasped audibly, the shock rippling through the room. Dolly responded only with a gentle smile and a slow shake of her head. She noted that when arguments could no longer be supported by substance, they often dissolved into personal attacks. Joy stood trembling, clearly searching for a final retort that might restore her dignity, but nothing came. The silence grew heavier by the second. Eventually Joy declared she was finished and accused the situation of being an ambush rather than journalism. Dolly replied with genuine surprise, pointing out the imbalance of power. Joy had the microphone, the platform, and had issued the invitation. The hostility had begun the moment Dolly sat down. If anyone had been targeted unfairly, it was not the host. Joy did not respond. She turned and walked off the set, ripping out her earpiece as she went. The cameras followed her briefly before cutting back to the remaining panelists, all of whom looked stunned, as though they had just witnessed a crash they could not stop. Whoopi cleared her throat and attempted to re-establish order, acknowledging how unexpected everything had become. Dolly immediately waved away any apology with grace. She smoothed her skirt and adjusted her jacket as if nothing unusual had occurred. She remarked that sometimes people reveal exactly who they are, and the healthiest response is to accept it and move forward. With effortless poise, she redirected the conversation back to the original purpose of her appearance, mentioning her new music as if the confrontation had never happened. The audience finally released the tension they had been holding, erupting into loud applause. Dolly sat smiling and waving, embodying composure and confidence. Somewhere backstage, Joy Behar was likely still grappling with the fallout, while on set the moment had already become something else entirely. What unfolded on The View was more than a heated exchange. It was a clear demonstration of how cruelty often collapses under its own weight when met with self-assurance and restraint. Without raising her voice or abandoning kindness, Dolly Parton had held her ground, refusing to be diminished. In doing so, she exposed hostility for what it was and reminded everyone watching that true strength does not come from tearing others down, but from knowing exactly who you are and standing firmly in that truth.